What's up, Cooper? This is my podcast project. So I'm first going to start off by talking about the Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was a justified expansion in the United States going westward because of open territories that would help benefit the U.S. And one of the leading issues in westward expansion caused by agricultural society was that immigrants were no longer coming to the South because there were limited opportunities for them, and as a result of this, they were settling and moving in West Territory and began their own plantations and bringing like slaves with them and in with them, and cultivation in the South caused the soil and erosion and drive Southerners into the Western territories. And another reason why America began to move westward was because the Indians were no longer a deterrent. People coming west no longer facing issues caused by immigrants because of the federal government pushed them off already. And for my next topic, I'm going to talk about the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Missouri Compromise is a mission of the Union caused tremendous controversy because the nation's spirit of nationalism failed to suppress national differences, and the nation and which made the state more difficult to like be controlled by the government because of like what people were doing and saying and all that. And the controversy came about because the Union had an equal number of slave and free states that would be equal regional power in the Senate. And if Missouri wanted to enter as a slave state, the regional power would have been thrown off, and like it would tip the balance of like how even it was. And Northern congressmen took a notice and proposed that Missouri would have to join as a free slave state to enter the Union, and Southerners acknowledged that the proposal and were pissed because they didn't want it that way. And armed conflict was avoided when Missouri Compromise was drafted because the Northern District of Massachusetts would enter as a free state in order to balance Missouri joining in as a slave state. So they compromised and laid out other boundaries and discouraged more conflict. And then there was to like avoid more conflict later on. And the compromise drew lines across the continent from southwest corner to the Missouri nation boundaries, and territories south of the line would be slave states, and territories in the north would be free slave states. And for my next topic, I'm going to talk about political ramifications and the westward, like that involves the westward expansion. So political ramifications began to appear as like an issue and for westward expansion, and the problem involves like slave and free slave states. And many did not know which states should have entered as free states or as slave states, because like there was conflict, and there was conflict was starting to rise because of like the arguments between them. So now I'm gonna talk about the Texas Revolution. Americans immigrated to Texas because they wanted to expand their slave empire, and they wanted to expand onto the rich land of unsustainable the Mexican Republic, and Americans began moving on Mexican soil in exchange for cheap land grants. And Mexicans believed the U.S. government would abstain from interfering with Mexico to help their economy if they were American settlers. And if Americans wanted to stay, consequently, they would have to become Mexican citizens, and they would have to accept the ban on slaves, which means they wouldn't be able to have any, and they would have to convert to catechism. And obviously, not one American settler abide by these rules with Mexico, and they began to ignore the ban on slavery as well. And and later on, Texas wanted greater autonomy, and in 1835 they were about against the Mexico rule. So now I'm gonna go to the Battle of the Alamo. Antonio Lopez was a ruthless general who seized power of Mexico City, and he was at the Alamo, and he led his army into the Texas rebellion in March 1836, and his forces attacked the garrison at the Alamo. After 12 days of cannon fire, the walls of the Alamo were conquered by the Mexicans, and Antonio Santa Anna ordered all prisoners to be killed, slaughtered, and The slaughter was expected to frighten the Texas people to surrender, but instead the fallen defenders of the Alamo became martyrs to the because Texas gained independence in the end. And Stephen Austin led American immigrants to settle east of San Antonio following of the of town founding the town of Austin. They sought the economic opportunity of good farmland in very big proportions, so they took their opportunity. They took their opportunity, and I'm gonna talk about President Polk and Sam Houston. So Sam Houston was born in Virginia, and he became American during the Revolutionary War. And Sam Houston defeated Mexican in the army of San Cinco, and in 1836, Santa Anna recognized Texas independence. The Mexican government did not recognize new boundaries, and as the first president of Texas, Houston requested that the U.S. annex Texas, but the North did not want a slave state. So, with the help of President Polk, who favored Southern expansion, he promised the North that they supported the war, then they would make sure it was not entered as a slave state. And Mexico refused to recognize the annexation, initiating the Mexican-American War. U.S. entered it as a slave state and annexed Texas in December 1845. In May 1846, General Zachary Taylor faced conflict with the Mexican army, leaving America with another easy win. And Polk promised if he were elected he would take the territory from like England, and he would make it a North Territory, which would be later on become Oregon, and territory was split up with England, and it would become Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, like that's what it would be nowadays. And my last two topics, I'm going to talk about the territory of Guadalupe. And so David Wilmot was a congressman from Pennsylvania. He was very anti-slavery and did not want the territory to be a slave state. And David proposed that there should be no slavery allowed in the newly acquired territory. And Wilmot connected this to a bill that connected $2 million a portion to Mexico, and they would never get it. In response to his proposal, the gag rule was put in place, from making Congress not be able to talk about slavery at all without like other people present. And for my last topic, I'm going to talk about the Gadsden Purchase. The Gadsden Purchase was an 1853 territory in which the United States bought territory from parts of Mexico, which was now southern Arizona and southern New Mexico. Southerners wanted this land to build Southerner Continental Railroads, like for the Southern Railroad, and it was also showed that American belief in manifest destiny. And that concludes my project. Thank you, and have a good day.